glad time for me whenever I'm back on our show here. And I have a really interesting person here to interview today. He's been through a lot himself personally. He even set world records in this different pole vaulting thing he does. It's not really pole vault, it's something else. But anyway, we'll talk about that later. But I want you, ladies and gentlemen, to meet the one and only Dale Harper.
Harper, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, he's quite a person. He has written a book, and he has a paper that he puts out now too, so which is great. Let's start with this. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your family. How many kids you got? 25?
25. Actually, I'd get in trouble with my wife if I had 25 kids, but I have 3 kids, Ken, Greg, and Wendy, and I have 10 grandchildren altogether, and
10 grandchildren? Wow.
1 great-grandchild. And I've been a math teacher, for 35 years. I'm retired, and I've taught everything from kindergarten classrooms as a math coordinator. I was also a math coordinator of Fremont Unified Schools a few years back too. And one of my jobs was to go around and demonstrate math techniques for teachers, some, fun techniques. And so I've taught everything from kindergarten to even some college math, but most of my experience has been elementary, junior high, and some high school.
Yeah.
And the college classes were for teachers. It was motivational tricks that you can use in the class, and in fact I brought one today.
Great. We'll look at that later, but let me ask you something else here too, because I used to be a math teacher myself, and I developed a lot of different things that they could do, like how to add and subtract fractions in their head, long fractions and what have you, by adding instead of subtracting and so forth, and you're familiar with that, I'm sure. But I enjoyed that, and I also taught it to veterans in Fort Irwin near Barstow, California, which was great. So it's especially interesting to me what you've got cooking in your math life, and what you're doing there. And of course, your athletic ability. Anyway, go ahead with what you were saying, then I have some other questions.
Okay, I was going to correct one thing. Well, you did correct it. I didn't set any world records in the pole vault, but my the area of sports I did the most when I retired was Scottish Highland Games, and that's the one where they go throwing cabers and things, big hunks of wood, and anywhere from about 60 pounds for older folks like myself to up to over 200 pounds for the guys in their prime. And these things can vary anywhere in length from about 12 or 13 feet, but the big guys might even throw them occasionally as long as 23 feet, but that's an unusually long caber. But they're like telephone poles, and there's a knack to it. You have to balance it, and so that and some other things. So that's one afternoon back in 2002. I was at the World Championship Highland Games for what they call age group track, and so they had us in 5-year age groups. I know you're familiar with that.
Yeah, where was this at, in Oregon? Or?
No, this is in Woodland, California.
Oh, Woodland.
Yeah, it's just like a suburb of Sacramento.
Yeah.
And so we had competitors there from different countries and so on. And so I trying to be modest about this, but I said 10 world records in 4 events. I would. They had one called the stone throw. It's like a shot put, except you throw with a stone. And there's one you can't move at all. Like we had a 22-pound stone, and you just use your body and put your body into it. And then there's another one called the open stone. And then there's some hammers we threw, except they're not the kind of hammers that people think of. They're like sledgehammers, except at the end they have a big round ball, and so it weighs like 16 pounds for one and 22 pounds for the other.
Yeah.
So,
and when you say 10 world records, this for distance throwing or heaviness, or what specific?
Right. Well, most of them were distance, except for 2 of them. Okay, the distance were the 2 stones you threw for distance. So the farthest person won. And so the reason I call it 10 world records is because I kept busting my own world record one after the other. And so we had a really fun master ceremonies. His name is David Webster, who's famous as Scottish Highland Game expert. Yeah. And he would say, "Oh, there goes another world record."
Wow. So just broken 5 minutes ago.
And so we had 2 for that, the shots at the 2 stones, and then we have 2 in the hammers. They're both for distance. And then we have one called the weight over the bar, and that means you get a 56-pound weight. It's a pretty good sized weight, and they used to have this in track and field, except in track and field they threw it with 2 hands, and we throw it with 1 hand, and the difference is we throw it over a bar. And you think of a pole vault standard, And so they'd put a crossbar on there, and then you'd take this weight and swing it between your legs, and then throw it up, and it has to go over the bar, and you get 3 tries.
Okay.
So it's just like the pole vault. 3 tries to get over the pole vault,
Yeah.
3 tries to throw this 56-pound weight over.
Over it.
Except they let us use the 42-pound weight when we got up to my age group at that time.
Yeah. Are these still going now, these games?
Right. They go
Okay.
on, every year they have a world championship
Oh, right.
for they call it Masters, Masters competition.
Yeah, Masters.
And they have people come over. It's interesting how this sport has spread around the world. Of course, it started in Scotland, but they have competitors there from Germany, from the Netherlands, from Japan, places you'd never think of.
Did they break your world records you had?
Sadly,
now?
sadly, they broke my world records that I set them back in 2002, and this is 17 years later. And
Oh, wow.
I would have liked them to last forever, but they didn't. They didn't last more than a few years. And then the last one, that was weight over the bar, and the last one was you pick up the caber, and that's the one like a big telephone pole,
Yeah.
and you pick it up by the bottom, and you balance on your shoulder, and then you start running forward, and the idea is you flip it, and the goal of it is not distance, but to turn it over end for end. And a perfect caber toss would be to throw it in a straight line, and they use the hands of a clock. Like a perfect throw would be called a 12 o'clock throw.
Yeah.
And if you go to one side, they would call that a 1 o'clock, and went to the other side, it'd be 11 o'clock, and everything in between. And
Okay.
so I won that one too.
Yeah.
And,
Now, one more thing too. You've done all these particular records. You have a newspaper that you put out and so
right,
forth.
a newsletter. It's
And,
called Dale
yeah,
Harvard Strength Speed Newsletter, and I think I've still got one right here. I'm sure I do. Unless I buried it in a. Here it is.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay, and I
have it
can
out, too.
maybe show this to the audience. It looks like this. And on the cover, I guess only strength aficionados would know this guy. This guy is a famous strongman. His name is Herman Gerner, who lived a long time ago. And
Yeah.
what he was famous for was he did a deadlift way back in the early 1900s with 793 pounds, and that still would be a very reputable deadlift.
793. Yeah.
Right, and the only difference is they didn't have any drugs then, no specialty Seuss or anything. He just did it with raw muscle
Yeah.
power, and so he's impressive. And then I try to include articles in here about track and field, weightlifting, anything in the strength sports. And I think you would
Yeah.
like the things in here about track and field because
Well, one thing I noticed there, because I used to run the 400-meter hurdles, and I loved it. I even tried out for the Olympic team. Didn't make it. I got 4th. But the 400-meter hurdles, there was 2 competitors there that you put in that broke the world's record. And who were these 2 fellows that raced against each other too?
Glenn Davis and Eddie Southern were both the
Okay,
world
Glenn
champions
Davis, yeah.
who made. And you said 1956 Olympics. Was that
Yeah, 56.
and they went on to become. And we had one more American, Josh Coolbrith. So they went to the 1956 Olympics and they swept it. In other words, they won all 3 places.
Yeah.
That's back in the days when America was really at the top of its game in track and field. And that's back before all the professional sports drew people away. Like nowadays, pro football players and basketball players make millions of dollars,
Yeah.
and only a handful of athletes make anywhere near that money. Like Usain Bolt was a famous one, but he's retired. And,
Yeah.
it's not as popular as it once was, which I wish it would be again, because
Yeah.
it's a great sport.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, the stuff you wrote in this newspaper here of different athletes that did these things. And now, the money thing is a biggie with them because they get paid for doing these things, whereas before, it was just the show, whatever.
Right.
And how do you think that influences the athletes now? Because some of them don't get paid that much either,
Well, like they say, that you'd have to do it for the love of the sport because like I say, it doesn't pay like any of the professional sports, like hockey or basketball or football or baseball. But I think some of them just like it so much, and there's less chance of injury. Like in football, you're more likely to get beat up. In track and field,
and hurt.
If you're a strong man, you would throw the shot put.
Yeah.
And so there's a chance where you can last longer too. In pro football, I think the average lifespan as a player is usually about 6 or 7 years before injuries or
show up. Huh?
Before the people outdo you because you have a narrow age span.
Yeah.
But in track and field, you can go into masters track afterwards. And what's neat about it too is they have a very active women's program. Now, see, that's a difference too.
Yeah.
Women are every bit as excellent
And they're
athletes
fighting
as
for it
men.
now. And newspaper, Red Ray, they want be paid as much as the athletes because they're just as popular.
Right.
So why not get the money too?
Oh, that's only fair. Yeah.
Yeah, that's going crazy.
So that's what track and field is.
And tell me, you know, because I sure want to pick your brain on this, and because I'm so interested in sports and what's happening and so forth now. When you think about the track runners or performers or whatever, what are the outstanding persons that you have in mind when you think of the track and field?
Well, one of the guys I like the best of all, because it goes way back, is Jim Thorpe.
Jim
And
Thorpe.
we're going way back to the
Okay.
1912 Olympics. And what I like about Jim Thorpe is he won a decathlon, which is considered the best all-around test of athletic ability because it has jumping, running,
It
throwing.
works, yeah.
And then he also came up with, he was, not only that, he came in second in the high jump in Olympics, which is not shabby by
Yeah.
itself. And I think he got either fourth or sixth in the long jump. And then he also, when he got done with that, he went around and won the pentathlon, which is 5 events, slightly
with the
different
way-
events than the decathlon.
Yeah.
So instead of a 100-meter dash, they have a 200-meter dash. And so, but then what I was going to say in my raving about how great he was, he played professional football. If he hadn't played professional football for the Canton Bulldogs, there would be no professional football nowadays. He was a big
Really,
star.
yeah.
He played professional baseball, hit like 3 home runs in a game. He played professional basketball. He even boxed a while. He could do anything. And this is the one that really makes me laugh. He was an intercollegiate ballroom dancing champion.
That too?
Yeah.
Wow.
So think of the versatility of the man. So
That's awesome.
I think in terms of versatility, there's the guy.
I knew a lot about him, but I didn't know that, especially the dancing part, because, you know, I do a lot of that. I've been in the decathlons and so forth, and I didn't win these things like crazy, but I did place high on them. And dancing is one of my favorite things too,
Oh,
you know.
great.
So I guess it follows in a way, you know, that if you do these other things, your body's working and so forth, you learn rhythm too.
Sure. Coordination.
Yeah,
Yeah.
coordination, what have you.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. Yeah, and even in basketball, I play a lot of basketball now, and I can do these crazy things, you know, that I did when I was younger, you know, 25, 30, and
And I'm really
night.
impressed with that. You know, at your age to get out there and run with the younger guys like that and jump
Yeah.
and dribble,
Well,
that's impressive.
But I don't know, but I love it. That's the main thing, you know. I'm staying with it every single morning, not just 3 or 4 times in a week. Every single morning, I do these specific exercise, if you want to call it that, you know. And that's what keeps me going. It's not genetics, as my brothers were one great basketball player, the other's a great wrestler and so forth. But they worked at it, you know. And I think it isn't just genetics, because a lot of people would have these things going for them, but if they didn't work out, you know, they wouldn't have it, just like you're talking about Thorpe.
Right.
He just worked at everything he did, and that's awesome.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. You can have the potential, but in order to maximize that, you have to work out regularly. Like you're saying,
Right.
you work out every day and play it all the
Yeah.
time. And that's what makes you good at it.
Yeah.
That reminds me of another one of my friends. We weren't close friends, but enough that he would send me pictures and things once in a while. It was Jack LaLanne. And,
Okay,
And
yeah.
he finally died at 96, but he used to joke that I'm going to live to be at least 100 because I can't afford, my PR would suffer. and so he used to do like you. He swam every morning for a couple of miles in his pool, and then he did weights, and then later on he did calisthenics. And so there's a man that walked the walk. He had a TV program, as you know.
That's right,
He was the
yeah.
first guy with millions of housewives doing exercises. Nobody else had ever thought about that, and so he did a big service for the American public.
Yeah.
We need him now too.
Absolutely, yeah. That's awesome. Tell me a little bit about yourself, because I was really impressed with the things that you did. You know, you're throwing the weights and all that. What kind of things do you do to stay in shape these particular days now?
Okay, well, I have some chin-up bars in my backyard that I have. My dad helped me back when he was alive, and we put the bars up, and I have one set at about 8 feet 5 off the ground. And the reason is that if I stand there and reach like this over my head, I can just touch it 8 feet. So I just want to be able to stretch and touch this. And so I want tall guys to be able to chin on that. And then I've got another bar next to it for only about 6 feet off, so even kids can do it. So ever since my kids were young, of course I had them do chin-ups when they were even 3 years old. They're out there learning how to do chin-ups. And so I used to tell them these stories about, I was bragging one day that I did 220 in one day, which I didn't do them all in a row, but I do like 10 or 15 or 20, and I just kept doing them. And So
these are pull-ups or chin-ups?
I did both. I mixed them up.
Oh, you mixed them.
I did
Okay.
120 of one and 100 of the other.
Oh, all right.
And so I told my kids this, and so my kids are competitive. I guess they get that from me. So they go out there and they chin up every day. And then one day, my older son Ken said, "Dad, we want you to look out the window and watch us." And I said, "Oh." He said, "Okay." So he says, "We're gonna smash your record." What?
Oh.
And so I had to watch them. So it took several hours, but they went out there, and my middle son Greg actually did the most. He did like 600, and I hope I'm not shortchanging Ken. I think he did like 400 and something, and then Wendy did like 300 and something. And bear in mind that Wendy's like 8 years old, and Greg's 11, and Ken's 14. But I may be missing by a year or two. But so even my daughter, I believe in this. She was, in fact, some ways she was the gutsiest. She used to go up in the bars and hang by her knees backwards, and they do what they call a suicide drop. And she'd swing up there, and I didn't know she was going to do this, and then she'd drop down the ground and land on her feet. And looking out the window, I saw her hanging, and I thought, I don't want to say anything, because what if she drops and kills herself?
At the wrong time.
And then I understand from her that some of the kids at school were doing this, and they finally banned this because they were afraid that somebody would hurt themselves. But she and her friends had been doing this for years, and nobody complained about it until people started worrying about those things.
Well, as you talk about these things, it's so stimulating because my children in the same boat too. But for the general public, as people, as you listen in to what we're talking about here, there are things you can do. It has nothing to do with records or world records or even city records or any kind, but just your own body doing what it can do to live longer and a happier, healthier life.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
yeah, just keeping in shape. And then you asked for something else. I also was I guess I told you I taught school for 35 years, and that, like I said, I covered all the way from kindergarten to college. And so one of my, I liked a lot of subjects, and it's interesting, but one of the things my kids remember most about me was, besides the math and the reading and the geography, was the music. And I used to play the piano. I'm not a concert pianist by any stretch, but I used to play the piano, and these kids would learn all these songs.
Wow.
And we'd do everything we could. I'm not claiming to be an expert, but we did it. We loved it, and we did rounds and we did descants and these things. And so when these kids would come back years later, they said that they remembered the math first and they remembered the music second. And I thought that was interesting, because I never really thought they would remember that, but we had a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Well, my kids, one's a great drummer, the other one plays guitar, two of them play guitars, and my daughter plays piano.
Great.
I never had anything to do with that personally, I didn't put the keys like this maybe, and that's about it, and the guitar go clunk, clunk. But they didn't get that from me by any means, So, but they do become great in what they're doing. Two of them play in the bands, and the daughter who plays the piano, she just had a ball doing it. But
well, at least
anyway,
you had a conducive atmosphere where they didn't get penalized for it. They had the freedom to try it, so that's something. On your part, even though you may not have had the talents. Maybe the genes are lurking in there somewhere.
Who knows? Who knows? But even as we talked about earlier, genes or not, you do what you do, and it's sometimes great if you got the genes to go with it. But if you don't, you're still doing things that are fun for you, and that's where you go to it,
Oh, and the other thing I did with the math and the reading is
okay, I want to hear more about that.
All my kids learned how to read at an early age, like 3 years old, and the way we did this, that Dr. Seuss had a great series of books. I don't know if you recall that, but he had books like Hop on
Seuss.
Pop. Dr. Seuss, he was that was his pseudonym for a famous writer. Theodore Geisel, I think, was his real name. But he wrote this series of books for kids, and they broke down phonics into certain sections, like you'd learn all short vowels in one book. Anyhow, these books were all fun, and so I would sit there, the kids on my knees, so to speak, and they would read to me, and I'd read, and we'd make sure we had a lot of fun doing this. And so they all learned how to do this, and by the time I got to the third kid, she was waiting for it, because she'd seen her two brothers thrive. And then we did a lot of math stuff too, like just making fun. Like we played Monopoly, and you think about Monopoly. Every time you rolled a dice, your mental addition. But as they got older, that wasn't enough for me. I made my own dice out of wooden 1-inch cubes, and I numbered them higher, like they would go up to like 9, 8, 7, 6. So when you multiply them. So you'd roll like 9 times 8 is 72. And since there's 40 squares on a Monopoly board, you'd be passing go quite often every time you got more than more than 40. You know, 40 would put you back on go again. And so you'd multiply, and they like that because you go by go and you get $200.
Yeah.
I remember back in the days when we all played Monopoly. And then we did a lot of that sort of thing. And then the properties back in the original Monopoly weren't, they were back from the Depression era. And so you probably remember that Boardwalk was the most expensive property for $400.
Yeah.
So I took and renamed the properties after Castro Valley streets and also Fremont, which is where I taught school.
You took it right in
And
town,
I made my own deeds for them, and I wrote several. I had several different game boards, and so the properties are up like to $400,000 or $500,000.
Wow.
So that's a good way to learn bigger numbers too. So I tried to make it all through games. So as a result, they all learned painlessly, and then what can I say? That you make something fun. And then we played games like Scrabble and then Boggle for words and spelling. And then I invented my own little game called Smarty that I was showing you the other day.
Yeah.
And
check that out again.
Okay, I'll take it out and show you that what I like about this
It's
is
called Smarty, huh?
it's called Smarty because I was trying to think of something different, and it rewards having a good vocabulary. So I made these dice really large because teachers told me.
Let me hold a couple of them there.
Okay,
I didn't
sure.
show 'em. No, just a couple.
All right. And
So I can see them.
so you would roll all 6 dice, and then one person could kind of put them in alphabetical order, like you'd on this one you could go A, E, J, R, X, and Z, and then everybody would take a minute. They each had their own scoring pad, and they would copy these. Now the reason I did this was because in when you play Scrabble, you run off the board too often. It seems like whenever I had a good word, I got the edge of the board and no place to play it. And then the other thing was that I didn't like the idea of just being limited to 7 letters in Scrabble. You know, except if you played it on another word, you could get more. So what I did to make it a little different was all you had to do was use at least 4 of these letters in your word. And then you could add on as many letters as you want, as long as you don't go past 18 letters.
Yeah.
So we've got kind of a tough one here because we've got X's and Z's and J's in here. But just looking at that without, we didn't stack the deck it or anything.
Yeah.
And I know you can probably, if we look at it just a little bit, I don't make it
I can make words
tough.
like J-A-R jar or
Jar jar. Okay, but then again,
X.
try to. But okay, that's very good. But remember, you have to make at least 4, use at least 4 of those letters.
Different word, yeah.
So,
Jar, axe, yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
okay. Anyhow, I was going to say
It makes
you could use unusual words
Similar.
like raise, like R-A-Z-E. You raise something,
yeah.
you destroy it, and then and there's other words that you could use at least as long as you use at least 4 of these words, 4 of these letters. But I don't want it to be too intimidating because sometimes I can think of words off the top of my head because I do a lot with I read a lot and I have a pretty good vocabulary, and so sometimes when I play games with people, they say that's not a real word, and I say, well, check it out in the dictionary.
Yeah, see what it is. Yeah.
But when I look at words, I try to make big ones. Like I can see relaxation in here. You use the R, the E, then you add an L in between. Remember, you can have letters that are not on the board. R, E, and then the A and X, and you go R, E, L, A, X.
Relax, yeah.
Relax, and then A, T, I, O, N.
Yeah.
And then you count all the letters, and you get to multiply it by how many letters you use here. So that in a nutshell is how that game works.
Well, you have so many games that are so interesting that you got there that it's awesome. And I guess you spent a lot of time on this to do that, Like I know you gave me these particular letter words that I worked on. At first I couldn't figure, but it always has something that's real there, that you can see. Because you asked me to guess. I remember I said that word number 15, and I guessed 3 numbers, and then finally you said, you did 15. But you go through these letters, and I figured that one out, what you did there, which is great.
All right, well, let's try that, because I don't know if the audience has
real
seen
quick,
this yet.
because we only have about 4
All right, so
minutes.
think of a number, and don't tell me. Let's see, maybe you can write it on this so it'll show up on the studio audience. Make it nice and big. The whole number between 1 and 60. I've got a pen here somewhere. So, and I'll try not to look.
Between 1 and 16?
1 and 60, 60.
60, oh, okay.
And don't let me see it, and then show it to the camera so they can see this.
I don't know if they can see it or not. Look it out here.
Okay, and then put it down so if I look at the camera, I won't see
it. Okay, I got it down.
I hope it showed.
All right.
It did. Okay, so now I'm going to hold up these letters, and we're going to hope the audience can see this too. Now, if you see this, the letter you're thinking of, tell me if you see it on this card.
My number that I did?
Yeah.
No.
No. Okay. Then I'll ask you, is it on this card?
It is not.
Wow. Okay, give me a hard one then. Is it on this card?
It is not there either.
Wow. Okay. This one?
And on that card, no dice.
Wow, you really give me a challenge today, maybe. How about this one?
And on this one, I do not see it there either.
Better be on this one or there's going to be some trouble.
Yeah, I see it on this card, yes.
Okay, was your number 32?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
That's pretty good, yeah.
Now, do you think you have this figured out that I could do one and you can try to guess it, or is that going to put you in a spot too much?
We won't have the time to
Won't have
do
the
all this
time.
right now.
Okay, that's fine.
But the thing is, looking at these cards,
Yeah.
there's this system there that you had. And there's so many numbers listed in the rows and what have you. And that's what you're going by. And when I studied after I did it, you showed me, and I kind of figured out what it is. But tell us quickly what you think.
Well, I don't want to give it totally away because
Okay.
at the end I'll
Yeah.
give people my email and they could write if they haven't figured it out. But I'll give you this hint that this has something to do with coding, like when you're doing computer coding.
Right.
And that's enough of a hint because people do computer coding will probably see the way these numbers are made, even though these are what we call base 10 numbers, the one
Yeah.
we use every day. You do things in the computer systems, it's a little different than that. So there is a pattern. And some kids think, oh, you memorized every single one on there? I don't think so.
No.
You know, what's on each card, but I do use a pattern based on coding. And stuff.
Yeah, right.
So that's the
And that's
trick
what I
with
did
that
when I
one.
followed on
Oh,
that.
do you want me to hold up my little card that shows my email here?
Oh, okay.
Just in case anybody wants to write. This is,
Yeah, put it out here like this.
okay.
This is the email here. You can see.
Maybe she can zoom in on it. There it goes.
Yeah.
DaleHarderEP@gmail.com. It's Dale Harder, E is in Edgar, P is in Paul.
Yeah.
And that's some of the things I talked about today.
And don't hesitate to write because he's got some really great stuff that you can tap into, and we're going to
thank
talk
you.
more about this later. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
So I think we're going to conclude this now. I really want to thank you for doing what you're doing. You've got so many interesting things that are awesome to follow.
Well, thanks for inviting me and thanks for the very kind words.
Yeah, well, you deserve it. You've done a lot of work, and it just doesn't come to you. You've worked at this, and you did many things to get it going.
Thanks again.
So thank you very much for being with us, and see you again another time.
Okay.
Beautiful.
Good.